Did everybody catch the forecast last night? Now, I do this every fall. But the forecast last night was for 59 degrees, winds 5 to 7 miles an hour out of the north-northeast, and a 95% chance of palm warblers and eastern phoebes. So I checked in on Birdcast last night. So you look at the forecast for weather, you look at Birdcast for the birds. And birdcast.info is the website, but if you just search on Birdcast, you'll find it. And you can type in your home county, and I put in Beaufort County, and you can see the map of what's going to happen across the U.S. for the next 3 nights. But it also tells you, based on weather radar, what happened last night. Last night there were 1.25 million birds that passed through Beaufort County. And that gets us to 57 million birds for the season that have passed through Beaufort County. All right. So you can tune in, and it tells you the 10 most likely species that are abundant this time of year that are on the move. And sure enough, there are eastern phoebes on all of the equestrian lots around the fences, and a whole bunch of activity out there for bird migration. But check out Birdcast. So I want to quickly switch over to talk about tonight's speaker, because it's got some owner's market info I want to share with you too. We've been putting this in the newsletter, but just as a reminder, the owner's market is becoming unwieldy, is that the right word? There are so many folks with great things to give as part of the owner's market program that the space has become an issue, and the shed that we have just doesn't accommodate it. So we're trying something different this year. Starting November 15th, you can take things to the trust barn. If you take them before that, we'll be very, very frustrated, because that's where we're teaching master naturalists and other things. We will send lots of notices out about this. If you have something substantial or some other change, or it's important, I believe Galen is your point of contact, Galen Golden. Her email is in the trust newsletter as well. But we'll get more information out to you. So just hang on to those things for now. It's a little different than usual. And the owner's market proceeds, so thanks to you all, that benefits the trust. And we use some of the proceeds to bring in speakers and to do other things. We've done the Birds of Prey Center visits in the past. And then tonight's speaker is here courtesy of funds from the owner's market. So what we wanted to do is multiply the impact of that funding. So last night, the speaker was at the Low Country Master Naturalist Association quarterly meeting. So he spoke to 60 folks last night. This morning, he toured the island with trust staff, and we had lunch with him today. And then this afternoon, members of the Habitat Review Board, stewardship, and staff did a ride around and talked about arborist-related questions, and he had some fantastic insights for us, and I believe he'll be sharing some of those with you tonight. And so I don't want to take up any more of his time, because he's got some great information to share. So tonight's speaker is Basil Camu, and he has a longer bio. I just am going to summarize it as he's pursuing his purpose and passions as co-founder of Leaf and Limb, a tree care company in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Project Pando, a nonprofit that aims to connect people to trees. He's a tree ecologist. He's ISA board certified master arborist. He's a Duke graduate. He calls himself the Wizard of Things, which I think is awesome. And he's the author of the book From Wasteland to Wonder, Easy Ways We Can Help Heal Earth in the Suburban Landscape, which he'll tell you a lot more about tonight. But let's welcome Basil Camu.
Thanks for being here, y'all. Hopefully you can hear me. First, I want to say I had the best time today. This was such an amazing island that you live on. Andy and Tony and Chris and Mara and Sloan, it was just fantastic. So first, I want to give it up for the trust team. A little bit about me. So I joined the tree service industry many years ago, not really knowing what I was going to get into, except for I thought I wanted to make money. And that was where I started. Become a millionaire before 30 was my goal. And we made a lot of money cutting trees down. If this sounds weird, you let me know. I can just abandon this. As I went deeper in my journey, then I started learning about trees and particularly soil. Soil was a really big path for me. I started to appreciate ecosystems and especially trees, and it began to concern me that we were making most of our revenue cutting down live trees. So we tried to steer out of offering removal services by convincing clients to keep their trees, and hit a lot of challenges, some structural issues, a lot of accidental finger wagging and things of that nature. And we decided in 2020 we were just going to say no more tree removals. And we walked away from about $2 million in recurring revenue that year. It was 40% of our business that year. It was one of the best decisions I ever made because it completely freed us to think about how we do tree care in a completely new way. We've added new things since then, and now we are a regenerative tree and land care company. And we're the first tree care company to earn a B Corp certification, which simply says that we actually do care about more than just profit. We also care about the well-being of people and planets. And I'm super proud of our journey. More importantly, I've had a blast. And everything that I've learned on the way is in my book, From Wasteland to Wonder. And I want to just tell you, I'm not making money on the book. That was a passion project for me that I did on the side. I don't sell it for money. It's one of the reasons why I was not able to bring a lot. We actually have somebody else that handles the distribution. But just quickly, matter of procedure, if you'd like a free copy of the book, it's the digital copy. You can just turn on your camera, point it at that little square-looking thing called a QR code, and tap the button, and you can get a free copy of the book. If you want the hard copy, it is simply the cost of printing and distribution. I've got a few over there, but you can also just order it later. All right, let's dive in. I'm just going to pass this around in case it's useful to you. So, I always like to start with my version of terrestrial ecosystem history. And I think it's really important for setting the stage for why we need to rethink how we do tree and land care in the suburban landscape. One of the things about you all in your community is you are very progressive. I don't think I've ever visited a community like this one. I've worked with many communities. So some of the things I'm going to say don't apply to you, but they're still fun to learn, fun to hear about, and maybe you'll find a few good one-liners you can share with your friends at your next dinner party. We're going to talk about the premise, then we're going to talk about the problems, and then we're going to dive into some very specific things. And all of this, the thesis of everything I have to say is very simple. If we simply rethink how we manage the suburban landscape, we can actually save time, save money, find a lot more joy from the life that comes from those actions, and we can help heal Earth. Especially in a time when there's a lot of environmental crisis, it's really empowering and hopeful to actually be able to do something. Whether it's a yard or it's an entire island, to be able to contribute to the well-being of the planet is something that I find to be particularly meaningful. Let's jump in. So, photosynthesis is what drives it all. This would have been a pretty good snapshot of planet Earth way back in the day. We would have seen a lot of rocks and a lot of dirt. And dirt is simply sand, silt, and clay. No soil back then. So how did we go from this to this? You can still see those rocks down there. Has a laser pointer? Yes, it has a laser pointer. You can still see the rocks down there, but now we have this new entity. So the driver began as this thing here called lichen. It's worth knowing about lichen because it was one of the earliest plant forms on this planet. Lichen is this really cool relationship between two different organisms. On the one hand, we have fungi. Fungi are very good at finding nutrients. They spit acid onto dirt, and they extract nutrients from that acid. They also can find water in very hard to reach places with these teeny tiny little filaments. The other part of that team was bacteria. And bacteria have a totally different set of superpowers. They can harness the energy from the sun and turn that into a usable form. And in the process, they also pull down carbon from the sky. And that is essentially photosynthesis in a nutshell. Yes, it might have looked like this at first, but after many lichen lived and died, they started filling spaces with their dead bodies. Now water was being held in place. Now life forms were advancing. We started seeing glassworts, bladderworts, club mosses, and on and on and on this progression goes until we get to here, live oaks, beautiful plants. Photosynthesis is what drove this transformation. And it created something called soil. Soil is just dirt plus life. That's all it is. Sand, silt, and clay plus life. Photosynthesis is life. but so are earthworms, and so are nematodes, and all kinds of stuff that lives in soil. This is what soil looks like when you zoom up super close. It kind of looks like a sponge, and that's a great way to think about soil, is it is a sponge. All that white stuff, that's the fungi I was telling you about. That old relationship between the bacteria and the fungi still exists today. It just looks different. The above ground portion, that's called a tree, and that still pulls carbon from the atmosphere, and it harnesses the power of the sun. The part that you can't see anymore is below ground. That's where fungi live. They still extract nutrients from dirt, and they still help trees find water in hard-to-reach places. Really, to think about a tree in its truest form, you have to also think about its underground ecosystem, and that's soil. One of the great things about soil is it is a sponge, which means it holds lots and lots of fresh water. So unlike where I began this presentation, now in the healthiest form of planet Earth, when it rains, all that water gets held in place in the soil. It no longer rushes down into the oceans. That's really important. Water drives photosynthesis. So now we see this positively reinforcing cycle spinning up. More photosynthesis, more soil, more water, and on it goes. Until we get to life, other life. Caterpillars that are eating leaves, birds that are eating caterpillars, all the things that feed on fungi, above and below ground. Everything on land either eats a plant or eats something that eats a plant. And that's true for we humans too. I'm going to take questions later, but go ahead.
No, but you said water drives photosynthesis. Can you explain that just so I can stay in the loop?
Sure. Yes, photosynthesis is, on the one hand, you've got water plus oxygen being released. And on the other side, you've got energy driving and carbon dioxide being sucked down. And and carbon dioxide being sucked down. That's the simplest version. Stated more simply, a tree will die without water.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so as we have more, and yeah, I do want to answer questions. I love questions. I just want to do it at the end. Everything eats, and this is true for humans too. We all eat plants directly or eat something that eats plants. And if you think about, just for humans for a second, think about everything in this building. The wood comes from a tree. The concrete was produced using energy from a tree because fossil fuels are old plants. That's what they are. 90% of energy used on planet Earth by humans is fossil fuels, just old plant matter. Plastic is made from fossil fuels, so plastic comes from plants. Everything, art, clothing, you name it, everything that we consume has its foundational roots in the land. Everything can be traced back to the land. That's where real wealth comes from. I mentioned this earlier, but this whole process pulls carbon from the sky. This carbon is being held in tree trunks, in soil, you name it, in life. There's all kinds of fascinating case studies about how much carbon life holds. Whales, otters, you name it. Really important, because this is what pristine ecosystems look like. Unfortunately though, and we'll only go here shortly, but it's important. You probably know these problems, but it's worth noting. So just in the last couple of 100 years, we have cut down half of all forests and grasslands. So we're debilitating our planet's photosynthetic possibility. When you kill plants, guess what? Soil dies. It can't live without plants. You cannot have soil without plants. So we've also lost half of all soil on this planet. So too go the animals and the insects and the birds. And it's not just from deforestation. There's lots of pressures. There's pollution, there's pesticides, there's all kinds of stuff. But just in the last 50 years, I'm 41, and I can say within my lifetime, we've lost half of all life on this planet, which is just really, it's concerning. And unfortunately, when we cut down these ecosystems, and when soil dies, and when plants die, and life dies, their carbon goes back to the sky. So we talk a lot about fossil fuels, and it's an important discussion, but we don't talk as much about where is carbon also coming from the land being degraded. And then not only is that land degraded and the carbon's released, but the photosynthetic engine has been debilitated, so it can no longer draw down as much carbon. There's probably the most important book written in the last 50 years by Paul Hawken called Drawdown. His second book is Regeneration, which I actually like better, but the two, it's hard to understand regeneration without drawdown. And his entire book is really centered on how we work in symbiosis with land for all the things that we do. And it's a lot to be gleaned from those books beyond the scope of this conversation. So,
Yes.
the low points. Now, I'm not going to leave you a low point. This is a fun presentation, lots of hope and action. I am a big fan of being able to do something about things. So, I love all the stuff that we can do. Your island is just a great example of everything. Most communities are not like your islands. We have a lot of grass out there. There's a lot of trees being planted improperly. A lot of easy wins that'll save us time and money. Even here on your island, we'll go through a few things that might be fun that'll save you some time and money. And by simply changing how we do these systems, we can help heal Earth. So I want to go through some fun stuff. So first are saplings. I really love saplings. We're going to do a couple of segments on saplings here. The key is that they're native. I suspect many of you know what native plants are. I always like to illustrate this with a simple story, and I know some of you were here last night, so you're going to hear a lot of the same things. But a caterpillar from this island cannot go and eat a Japanese maple. The Japanese maple will defend itself because nothing wants to be eaten. It's just how it goes. So it takes caterpillars a very long time to be able to overcome the defenses of a tree in order to be able to eat its leaves. It takes tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years for a caterpillar to co-evolve with a plant in order to be able to eat it. This is why live oaks are so great here, because they have co-evolved with 1,000 different insects, and they can eat from that tree, which means carbon is being passed through, life is happening. It's a really great thing. So we want the native trees because they provide the most amount of life, and if we don't necessarily care about life, well, they provide the most amount of carbon pass-through as well. There's lots of reasons to get behind native trees. But I like saplings because you can plant lots of saplings in the same time it would take you to do one potted plant. And those potted plants have all kinds of issues. They are watered daily, they're fertilized daily, they're used to a certain lifestyle. You just can't take a pampered tree and put it out in the suburban landscape and expect it to survive. This is why 50% of all these trees do, in fact, die after being planted. And then, even if they make it, they still have this root bound issue, whereby 10 years later, 20 years later, they start to deteriorate. And the reason is simply the root structure was just never right. So saplings bypass all of this. They have these beautiful root structures. They're cheap, a couple of dollars for a sapling. You can grow your own, which we're just going to talk about here in a minute. And they're super hardy out in the suburban landscape. They don't need much. A little bit of water and they're going to be fine. We actually don't water our saplings at all. We make them survive when they usually do. Yes, all right. This is one of my favorite applications for saplings. And it fits right in with your nature curtains. I had the pleasure of getting to see how you all do screening, and I love it. I think it's so cool. Here's a little twist on what you could think about doing in future. We used to, 10 years ago, if a client said, we'd like a tree here, we would have recommended, oh, well, let's get a 15 or 20 gallon tree, let's put it in the middle, and let's maybe get a couple of other 5 gallon shrubs and we'll plant it around. Well, the plants are expensive, they're challenging to plant properly, they have all the issues I listed earlier, and you're going to have to maintain that bed forever, and bed maintenance is a real bummer. You're either pulling weeds by hand or you're spraying a poison. Some people are removing leaves, which I would advise against. We'll talk about that later. Some people are doing edging, all kinds of activity that happens around the bed. For many of our clients, they're spending a lot of money on bed maintenance. Well, we can just skip all that. For the same amount of money, the same amount of effort, we can load that space up with a whole variety of native saplings. We won't have any of the bed maintenance in the future, and something really cool happens when you plant lots of native plants near each other. I'm going to show you. This is day 1. 5 months later, we have a camera sitting on a picture post. So already we have trees that are 6 feet tall the first 5 months. So keep in mind, this camera's on the same picture post across 3 years. This is year next. We now have trees that are 15, 20 feet tall. Already the camera is sort of just too close. We positioned it pretty far back thinking it'd be okay. By the third, 28 months later, this is the 3rd growing season, it is a full-fledged forest. Turns out that when you plant these species near each other, it's a rising tide lifts all boats situation. And the research supports that. It says that when you have groups of plants, they help each other. And it makes sense. Plants come from a forest, it's a community setting. It makes sense that trees and shrubs would do better in community than by themselves. And we're going to see lots of examples of how being in community is better for plants in general. We take the same application with just shrubs. So now I'm looking at a different site. We are still 5 months in. They started off as these little pencil saplings. These are only shrubs being used specifically for a privacy application. We've got 25 different native species in there. So 5 months in, 16 months in, and we're not going to talk about native meadows today, but this is another big part of what we recommend. And here we are in that third growing season. The camera's just been sitting in the same spot. You really just can't even see what's happening. But I'll tell you right now, the shrub thicket is as tall as these beams. It only took 3 growing seasons. It's so dense you can't see through it. This is a really fun way to do. We call them thickets and pocket forests, but it's essentially your nature curtains that y'all are doing here today, just done slightly different. Here's the best part. Not only do I love saplings, and not only do I love planting saplings in groups, but we like growing our own saplings. And they're so easy. This is actually what we do at our nonprofit. Our nonprofit is called Project Panda. It's named after the quaking aspens in Utah, and it's based on the idea that we're all rooted in the same shared resources, and what's good for one is good for all. And the idea of Project Panda is we engage the community to collect native seeds from our local counties, and they help us build these boxes. So here's what a box looks like. This is the bottom of the box. This is what makes them magical, by the way, and I'll get to that in 1 second. We work with the community to process seeds, and then we plant the seeds, like I showed you here. These are acorns. And then guess what? A couple of years later, well, just 1 year later, rather, you get a box full of young saplings. In a 2x4 box, we can grow 500, 700 trees. It's an extraordinary amount of plant material that we can get in one small box. What makes these boxes work so well is this concept called air pruning. This is upside down. It'll be flipped the other way. So this is the top, and the cage is underneath. When the roots go down and they poke through the cage, they encounter air and they stop growing. It's called air pruning. And what they do instead is they start growing sideways roots. So they create these very healthy saplings. And it also is what allows them to easily be pulled out of the box. They don't tangle with each other. So long story short, saplings are the best. You can do all kinds of fun things with them, and you can actually grow your own, which I think is great. Especially given the work that y'all are already doing in your community nursery, I think this would be an easy add-on. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to get off saplings as much as I love them. Pruning. All right, first I want to take you to the forest. Imagine you're walking through any of the forests here on this island and you see trees. They're competing with each other for sunlight. They're growing close. They have straight trunks. They have well-spaced branches. That's how trees are supposed to look. That is a very normal thing. This, unfortunately, is not how trees are supposed to look. This is a tree that's gotten too much sunlight. We call this tree obesity. We actually, Tony and I were in a section of the forest, I don't remember where, but it was one of the beautiful areas, which they all are, and we saw live oaks growing without this spread. They just had one main trunk, and that's because they had to compete with other trees. Not that this isn't beautiful, it really truly is, but it's just more likely to split. These long branches, they become heavy, it's getting so much sunlight, it's not competing, it just isn't how a tree is supposed to grow. Not the end of the world, just not ideal. Here's another example. This is a red maple. This is the red maple growing in the forest. This is the red maple in the suburban landscape. And by the way, this is a very normal looking neighborhood. I've visited thousands of neighborhoods, and this is what most of them look like. So here we have a very strong trunk, nice, well-spaced branches. This has lots of competing trunks. And guess what? This tree did split, predictably so. This is why in suburban USA, the average lifespan of a tree is 50 years, which is nothing. Oaks live over 1,000 years. Maples live 500 to 700 years in the wild. Pines, 700 years easy. Normal tree lifespan is measured in hundreds of years, not in decades. So it's a bummer because this actually caused property damage. It hurt a house. It died prematurely. We lost this tree that we wanted to see at maturity. All these bummers, and then it had to be replanted. All of that can be solved through structural pruning. And structural pruning is all about, if the tree is young, you're training it for a strong central trunk. If it's older, you're reducing weight off of its long branches. And I would tell you that's the only pruning that really matters for a tree. I have to always do the obligatory make a good pruning cut, because a good arborist will never not do this. But yes, base of a tree, branch has this thing called a branch collar. You don't want to cut it off. If you don't cut it off, you get this. This is beautiful. This tree is healing. That's called response growth. And this is the tree healing that hole. It will eventually completely seal, and decay will never be a problem. In contrast, this tree was not properly pruned. And it took about 10, 15 years for this to show up, unfortunately. It's always a real bummer when somebody pays to have a tree pruned and instead they just pay to have the tree killed. It happens all too often. This is a completely sealed set of pruning cuts right here. No decay issues. So, we can build strength through pruning. We build health through soil. We talked about soil earlier, but I want to give you the fundamentals of what is building healthy soil for a tree. It's really simple, y'all. No products necessary. Leave the leaves. Makes sense, right? If you've walked through the forest recently, that's what's crunching under your feet. Lots of rotting leaves, lots of twigs and sticks. It's very normal. This is the forest ecosystem. At some point, I'm going to do an entire presentation on why I love leaves. And there's so much to say here. I'm going to skip it all and just say, leave the leaves. Free fertilizer. If you want to use a product, use compost. You can make it, you can buy it, but it's the only product worth making or buying. And then finally, these are called arborist wood chips. Every tree service gives them away for free. It's just the chipped up debris from their pruning operations or their removal operations. This is really good stuff to put around your tree too. It mimics the branches and sticks that you find in the forest. Unlike designer mulches, now y'all don't use designer mulches here, which is great. This might be the first community I've ever entered that's not using designer mulches. But if you were, I'd say don't, because this happens. They become waterproof. We don't want our mulch to become waterproof. That's becoming very counterproductive. The whole point of mulch is to hold water, protect the tree. We don't want this. This happens with all the triple shreds and double shreds and you name it. Now, when we do mulching, we don't want that. This is called a mulch volcano, and it will kill a tree. Tree trunks are not meant to be buried. They just can't handle it. It should look like this. You want to see what's called a root flare or root collar, and this is basically where it becomes roots. So this portion keeps dry, roots want to stay wet. I do love this too because they went all the way out to the edge of the canopy. That's really great. You'll do such a great job with big mulch beds for your trees. That's what they want. The only complaint I have here is I just wish they'd plant some understory shrubs and trees. We need those. They help lots of life in the tree finish their life cycles. Most caterpillars and leaf hoppers, they need to be able to drop down to the layer below. If you've read Doug Tallamy's work, I mean, he harps on this all the time. It's in his trip. All right, this is our fun segment. I have a real soft spot for old trees. This particular tree was actually in my grandma's front yard, and it was a 350-year-old white oak. Despite my best efforts, my aunts and mother decided to sell to a developer, and this was bulldozed down, unfortunately. This can only be bought with time. I said this last night, but not even Jeff Bezos can buy this tree. He can buy the land it sits on, but he cannot command this tree in his front yard. It does not happen. You cannot transplant this tree. No money in the world can buy this tree, which I think is just speaks volumes. It's priceless. And from an ecosystem standpoint, this is a metropolitan suburb it is Atlanta, Georgia, if you will. There's so much life feeding off the leaves. I love Robin Wall Kimmerer's work. Her first book about moss, she talks an entire book about moss, and it is fascinating. But one handful of that moss growing right there has unbelievable amounts of life. It really is like a mini forest in a handful of moss. It's really fascinating. So you have this ecosystem of the tree, you have the ecosystem of the moss, you have ecosystems in the folds of the bark, and then you have ecosystems underground. The amount of carbon this is pulling out is wild. The soil it's building, just everything that happens for a tree like this is just incredible. I'm going to get into some unique things that I saw here today. One of the things I hear most often from clients is the big tree scares me. And I get it. They're big trees. There's some fear behind trees, unfortunately. But it's counterintuitive. The big trees are actually your safest trees because they've weathered all the heavy-duty storms. So unless you've gone digging through the root zone, which we'll talk about that shortly, these are actually your safest trees. And this right here is the giant spruce pine that I got to visit today. I hear it's the co-champion for the state, and it is an unbelievable tree. Love it. I saw this one here too, very old loblolly pine. We don't see many like this in Raleigh anymore. Most of them have been cut down. But these are some grand old trees, and they're some of the safest there are. You don't have to be scared of the big trees. I also often hear, and I can't illustrate this without video, but I often hear the trees moving, and it scares me. And I get that, but trees need to move. It's how they get stronger. The analogy I use is like a human, we need to move too. We have to build strength. And trees are the same. They don't have muscles per se, but they have their own mechanism for building strength, and it's based on movement. You want to see your trees moving. Hollows are another thing we hear very often. So quick rule of thumb, unless that hollow affects more than 1/3 of the outer portion of the trunk, probably not a big deal. This one, most definitely not a big deal. It's a tree right up there. Even this one, not really a big deal. It's certainly borderline, but it's not 1/3 of the trunk. It's doing well, and also I'll direct your attention to this. This is that response growth I was showing you earlier. You can see it all the way around. This tree is doing a great job healing. This tells me the tree is very vigorous, a lot of health, and that's probably being driven by the excellent job that you're doing here on building soil. When I see this, I think home protection. It's great to have trees around your house. People often get scared, but the truth of the matter is a healthy tree rarely falls. Sometimes a hurricane can drive that to happen. If you're getting your trees inspected pretty regularly and there's no obvious sign of root plate lifting up, or if the roots haven't been cut, or if there's not a big hollow, it's not very common for a tree to fall. And even if it does, and it's near your house, there's no momentum. It's just a leafy, sort of gentle. It's very rare for a live tree near a house to even cause damage when it does fall. The worst thing you'll usually see is maybe it punches a hole in the roof and there's some water damage. But really what happens more often than not is these big trees, they actually, when a tree does fall, they catch each other and it just holds it in place. So I say home protection. But when we do this, they do fall. So this is a very poorly executed tree protection zone. The rule of thumb on tree protection is if you can, you should preserve that tree at the outer edge of its canopy. That's the safest, best way to do it. If you can't get that much, which is common, then you want to be no less than 6 times, I'm going to skip the specs, it's in the book. You can go less, but just know if you go too close to the trunk like this, you're going to actually structurally destabilize your tree. So they put a path here, they put a foundation here. These trees have been fully destabilized and they are now dangerous trees, and that's really unfortunate because a little bit of planning could have very easily saved this. I could also do a full lecture on tree protection setup. I'll skip it, but I'll just say these fences are completely useless. If there's any developers in the room, guess where everybody's sitting in the summer on the construction sites? Inside of the tree protection zone, because it's the only place that has shade in the summer. So we recommend putting up proper chain link fencing if you really do care about the tree. I'm happy to answer questions about this, but aside from root damage, you don't normally have to worry about a healthy tree. And then when a tree does die, it starts a whole second life. It is incredible the ecosystems that happen from here. Tony showed me this tree. It sounds like it's been in this state for about 20 years, which I think is so cool. So much life lives here. You've got bats and beetles, all of our migrating birds. We have something like, 85 species in Raleigh that rely on these dead trees. A lot of life happens when a tree dies. So we always tell our clients, unless that tree is a hazard, and this is true for branches too, unless the branch or the tree is a hazard, leave it. Dead trees and dead branches are super important for our ecosystem health. So, I hope I've given you a little taste of how rethinking simple paradigms can save us time and money, find joy, and help heal Earth, something you know from living here. So I'd love to answer questions. Time check. I'm trying to stay on time here. I think I'm on time. Yes.
We have 4 allowed lollies. We live on the marsh, and they're right on the wharf. And there's no sign of anything happening except one is starting to die. Is there anything we can do to keep them alive?
The only possible path is simply giving it the best soil you can.
Can you add soil to that? It's going to go into the marsh, but can you add soil, or do you dig around it? Is there anything you can do to help its life?
One thing I'll say is, do send me an email, and I'd love to just see a picture of it. But just hearing what you're saying, I don't think that would be an option. Adding soil isn't normally an option, but again, there are unique site-specific conditions. Is it an erosion issue, or is it just a decline?
It's time.
Okay, yeah.
Time is not on their side.
Gotcha, yeah. Your best bet is arborist wood chips, leaving the leaves, planting some understory shrubs, and that's really the best you can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Then I'll go over here.
Okay, so I had always heard that magnolia leaves were trash leaves because they don't break down, and I also heard that pine straw is very acidic and it also doesn't break down. Can you just clarify that?
Sure, yeah. For a magnolia, those leaves are super important. It's all part of its life cycle. So really simple rule of thumb is if it rots, it builds soil. That's just the super easy thing. Pine straw rots and it builds soil. In terms of changing soil pH, plants buffer their own pH in what's called the rhizosphere, this very small area around the plant's roots. So it almost doesn't matter what the surrounding pH is. Plants will buffer their own. But I will tell you, even the notion of soil pH is fraught with challenges because pH is really a liquid solution. So there is a lot of unknown in the world of soil and pH. It is not even close to clear cut. And most of the things that you think, you've heard about soil are actually just landscape mythology, if you will. I'm going to go here next.
You showed those were great pictures of the nature curtain after 3 years. But one of the things that happened was what happens after 10 years. And that seems to be that everything grows up and it shades the understory, and you've got this great vegetation on top, but no nature curtain left.
Yeah, for the systems that we're planting, if it's a pocket forest that has trees and shrubs, and they stay dense top to bottom, now we'll see what happens in 50 or 60 years, but I would just point to the forest. If you go out in the forest, assuming there's not an overpredation of deer that are completely denuding the forest floor, there are, like, I'll give you a very specific example. Where I live, it starts off as pine and poplar. They'll grow up and they give way to oaks and hickories and beech. They grow up, they mature, they get larger, they create spaces in the forest floor that are then filled by various shrubs like oak leaf hydrangea, or in our case, we've got a variety of different shrubs that will actually fill that. So when you walk in a healthy forest in my neck of the woods, like I'm thinking of Eno, you see mature forest, but you also see very dense understory. So it won't be a problem long term, and even if you want to retroactively fill a space, it's just about finding native shade-loving species for this area that'll do well. I don't know what order to do, but let's go here and then let's go.
Okay, I live in Minnesota and grew up there, and home of these fabulous maple trees with the most kaleidoscopic, beautiful, beautiful colors and branching habit. You can't find them anymore to replant. Where I live, which is actually the original planting in the early 1900s, late 1900s, it's called King's Maplewood, so there are a lot of maples. Replacing with hybrids doesn't fit into your scheme of things, and they grow fast, and that's great, but I can't find native maples anywhere. We had 14 in our front yard and we have one left.
Yeah, there's not a great market for native plants. It's emerging right now. One of the challenges is the nursery wants to grow and sell trademark species. That's where your
Right.
margins are. Traditionally, a native plant just doesn't carry the margins. That's changing, which is great. But here's the great news. Trees grow on trees. So all you gotta do is go collect some seeds and you can grow your own. You can skip the money and just get straight to the growing.
Basil, so what if you took saplings and put all the same, I know you use a diversity of species, like in a pocket forest or something. What if you tried, one of those same treatments and used all maples?
All maples.
Yeah, I'm just curious how.
Well, I think some species would do well. Like I'm thinking of Carolina cherry laurel, Prunus caroliniana. They probably love it because they kind of do that anyway. But I think for most species, you would not see that collective explosion. It
So
really
they're receiving benefit from other species then?
Yeah, the research seems to say you've got to have at least, well, Michael Phillips, who wrote Mycorrhizal Plant, in his book he specifically says 8 different species, which I think is too specific. But I think the idea is, the research does support that having a diversity creates this underground economy where they are essentially bartering different nutrients and helping each other in different ways.
That's fascinating. That's really
Yeah. Suzanne Samar's done a lot of interesting isotope studies looking at root systems and what happens, and it's really fascinating. There can't, yeah. I'm going to go all the way to the back and then we'll go here.
The book, The Secret Life of Trees by
Peter Wohlberg.
Yes. And trees communicating with each other.
Yeah.
Would you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah. People criticize him for that book, but his intention was to sort of develop a connection with those forests. And his ideas are absolutely rooted in things that happens, but where he gets criticized, and this is normal for scientists, they criticize the humanization of trees. So I don't think there's anything non-factual about the book. It's where he takes criticism is for the humanization of the trees. And that's really just a quarrel between the scientists and the communicators. I myself prefer being a communicator because what's the point of rattling off a bunch of Latin and studies and everybody's going to sleep? The whole point is to inspire people and get them excited about these things. And to that end, I think Peter's done an awesome job.
We relocated 74 trees on our property to make our property better. And with the 4 trees that we talked about that are on the marsh, we were witness to seeing the longleaf pines that they planted here, the native plants that they planted here to bring the longleaf pines back. Is there a species like a longleaf pine that we can plant on the marsh that would live through the salt water? Or is there any other native species that we can plant along there? Because eventually those are going to die, but we can give a head start to something new.
Yeah. Well, Susan has an awesome nursery and she has many cool species and she would love to. She can show you some. But the more meta level answer is you could walk around the island and just take a look at what's growing in similar conditions to your site and then collect some of those seeds or see if they're already being grown, and those would be the trees to plant. Also, I want to be careful. I did just inadvertently criticize scientists. I very much appreciate scientists' work.
So I live up north and leaf leaf
Oh, yeah.
has been
Yeah.
horrific. We have an area, it's about an acre, and it was completely covered, almost like a single species, all beach, and it's now completely dead. So this is very good, because I was looking at it the other day going, what do I do? Do I just let it sit there and see what grows? Do I?
This is a tough one. Beach bark and beach leaf disease both. We've not.
It's horrific. I mean, it happened overnight.
We-
Acre trees, couple of big.
Yeah.
So as I said, I was literally looking at the space going, do I go in there? Do I start planting little vines? Do I just see what happens?
I think with invasive pests, it's a different situation.
Yeah.
You do potentially have to intervene if you can. So like emerald ash borer, for example, if you don't do something, they are going to kill the ash trees. So there's no known cures right now.
Right, yeah.
There's a guy named Jake Tapper who's just written a book that he talks a little bit about it. I actually have not read his book yet, it's on my list. I don't know if he gets into any solutions, but I will say, yes, you could wait it out, but you might have to wait like, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 years. Because geological time spans are so different than human time spans. It's almost incomprehensible. You know, tree time compared to human time is like human time compared to dog time. Or human time compared to fruit fly time. Like very different scales. So eventually, yes, it will be okay. With invasive pests, it's worth intervening potentially. And it may look like removing the beaches and planting new species. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough to advise. Other questions? These are great questions, Dylan. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. This was fantastic.